Good morning and welcome, everyone. My name is Jennifer Trench. I'm the Regional IMAP Coordinator here in Massachusetts. IMAP is an association of media professionals and a global network of media who work together for the achievement of a world of lasting and sustainable peace. The International Media Association for Peace recognizes the vital role that journalists play in guarding against totalitarianism and supporting the expansion of freedom. IMAP represents a worldwide professional network of journalists who support a socially responsible and moral media to convey accurate content, address the challenges of our time based on the highest principles of ethical journalism, and understanding that universal values are key elements of a world of peace. Our webinar today is titled Lasting Peace Through Conflict Transformation, and our moderator today is Ray Lipokin. Ray is the UPF Director for Western Pennsylvania. Welcome, Ray.
Thank you, Jennifer, and welcome to everyone as well. And a couple of years ago, I enrolled in the Peace Studies and Leadership program at HJI, and I have to say it really opened up a whole new world to me, something I really didn't realize that how established the field of peace studies was, and I was really drawn into it. And after working a few years as well with IMAP, the International Media Association for Peace, I'm really beginning more and more to understand how important the media is in giving correct analysis of the news. In other words, the media can really give us or lead us in a certain direction. So it's so important to have fair and unbiased media presentations. So today we're going to get kind of a good dose of both of these. We have two distinguished speakers with us today, Dr. Ward, Chairman of the Peace Studies Department at HJI, and Cheryl Wetstein, who is also an advisor with IMAP and a senior advisor with the Times Global Group. But first of all, I'd like to introduce the UPF President for America, Dr. Michael Jenkins. Dr. Jenkins, welcome.
Thank you, Ray, and congratulations on this important program of the International Media Association for Peace, IMAP. I'm honored to be with you today. I'm looking forward to Dr. Ward and also Mrs. Cheryl Wetstein. The media's influence in peace is very critical, and we're dealing right now. I also work with the Washington Times as the president of the Washington Times Holdings, and our bureau chief in Korea for chief is Andrew Salmon. Right now, his articles are playing a critical role in dealing with the problems there in the Northeast Asia sector with China, North Korea, and also the Republic of Korea. And his reporting is uncovering many things that are helpful. They can be very helpful in the discussions between those nations, and particularly between the U.S., Japan, and Korea. The alliance there is so important. But also, if media doesn't have an ethical or a kind of a moral principle, they can also use their skill to sabotage good developments towards peace. So this program is so critical and so important. And I'm just honored to be a part, Ray, and thank you to all of your team. And again, Dr. Ward and Cheryl, we look forward to listening in. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. So I'd like to invite Dr. Ward up, but first let me give you a little background. Dr. Ward served as the sixth president of HJI International Graduate School for Peace and Public Leadership from 2019 to 2022. Since stepping down in 2022, he's continued to serve as professor of peace and public leadership and as chair of HJI's graduate program in peace studies. Dr. Ward served from 1993 to 2000 as the associate director of the University of Bridgeport's New England Center for International and Regional Studies under the leadership of Dr. Stoyan Ganov, former foreign minister of Bulgaria and the 47th president of the United Nations General Assembly. In 2000, he was appointed dean of the University of Bridgeport's College of Public and International Affairs and served in that capacity for 18 years. In May of 2019, he was recognized at a public ceremony for his service and conferred the title Distinguished Dean Emeritus. Dr. Ward was active with the Committee on Teaching about the United Nations at UN headquarters in New York from 2012 to 2019, and was elected as a member of its governing board in 2018 and re-elected in 2019. Dr. Ward's writings and research have been published in the Washington Times, World and I Magazine, the International Journal of World Peace, the Journal of Unification Studies, the Journal of Censor, Unification Thought Institute in Japan, Paragon House, and the E-International Relations, and he's also the author of March to Moscow, The Role of Reverend Sun Myung Moon in the Collapse of Communism from Paragon. Welcome, Dr. Ward.
Thank you so much, Ray, for your very kind invitation. And thank you, Dr. Jenkins, for joining us today. And thanks for all of those who are here and those who are taking the time to watch this event. And this topic was suggested to me by Ray Lipicon. I hope that what I share today will be of basically further some understanding of the importance of what we understand as conflict transformation. So I'm going to begin now by sharing my slides, and we will. This will be a two-part session. The first part here will be. Excuse me. So if we look at the history of peace studies as an academic discipline, certainly one of the key figures in the beginning of what we know as peace studies today was Immanuel Kant. And, in the 19th century already, he wrote a text entitled Perpetual Peace. And that talked about the way in which peace can be realized. He talked about two kinds of approaches. He talked about preliminary articles, which dealt with certain practices that those involved in conflict should respect if they wanted to be able to take the steps towards peace. I'm not going to go through those points today because we don't have time. But he also spoke finally about what he viewed as the three definitive articles for peace. And the first of those was that the civil constitution of each state shall be republican. And what he meant by that was that it should be based upon rule of law. And he said that such countries that really respected rule of law, that had constitutional governments, that they should be the foundation for a federation, because he felt that if those principles were in place within a country, then based upon that, it would be possible to build a federation that also respected those principles. And so this creation of an international organization of constitutional republics is very important. And I just want to make a few comments here about the understanding of the constitutional republic and what that means. As noted, it reflects rule of governance, rule of law, and governance based on institutions with defined and delimited roles. Those of us living in the United States, for example, we know that this is one of the big issues that comes up every day with regard to the president and the legislative bodies and the judiciary, because roles are delimited for the executive, the judiciary, and the legislative branches of government. And there's some debate about those things, but at the same time, everyone is really encouraged to stay within his or her own lane with that respect. If we look at a constitutional republic and we see how change is affected in such a constitutional republic, there are a certain number of factors that play key roles. First of all, interest groups. That's where ideas for change, ideas for improvement occur. And the media next is the one that decides which of those various calls for change are going to be advocated for or supported by the media. The political party takes its signals from those interest groups and the media as it defines its platforms. And then those elected based upon the political parties are the ones who have a great impact upon the legislative branch of government and ultimately likewise on the executive branch of government. And the judicial branch of government plays a very important role in terms of determining, the constitutionality of the changes that are affected by the legislative branch of government and the actions taken by the executive branch. So interest groups are where everything begins. And just to give an illustration of this, we can take the case of Dr. Martin Luther King. Back in 1955, Dr. Martin Luther King assumed a leadership role in the Montgomery Improvement Association. That particular association served to effect the Montgomery boycott, which ended segregation in the Montgomery bus line and played a key role, was really the launching pad for a nationwide effort to put an end to segregation. Dr. Martin Luther King was able, through his campaign, to gain the attention of the media. The media covered his story. The media allowed him to articulate his viewpoints. And eventually, those ideas impacted upon the political parties. And civil rights came to be embraced, both by the Republican and likewise by the Democratic Party, culminating in 1963 with the Civil Rights Act. So these three factors, interest groups, the media, and political parties, they impact upon the legislative and executive branch of government, and the judicial branch plays that very crucial role, likewise, of determining the constitutionality of the steps that are taken. And sometimes they even precede the decisions of the Congress. For example, Brown versus Board of Education, which ended segregation in American schools, that took place in 1954. A year prior even to the creation of the Montgomery Improvement Association, which led to the civil rights movement being broadly propagated in the United States. Conflict transformation. We've already heard this several times by Ray. You know, when I heard the word conflict transformation the first time, I thought, why that term? It just seemed like a strange term to me. It was almost like, well, we're going to be transforming from conventional warfare to nuclear warfare. I didn't know what it meant exactly. It seemed like a very unusual term, but it has been really the term that has been used to define conflict resolution, if you will, for the past more or less 30 years. And probably the key force in doing all this is a peace scholar by the name of John Paul Lederach. And he really has really, I would say, been the pioneer of understanding what is meant by conflict transformation. So I'd like to just cover a few of those points with us here at this time. Conflict transformation wants to deal with systemic changes, including changes in relationships. And I would even say that probably the most important change is indeed changes in relationships. So it's not just about ending boycotts. It's not just a matter, for example, of ending a war or signing a treaty. It's really about coming to the point where you can be able to change relationships at the most fundamental level. That's what it's really all about. So there are two dimensions of conflict, if you will. One of those is the conflict about the issue itself, and the other is the conflict about human relationships and the hurt that results from them being mishandled. I would say that that is the deeper issue when we're talking about conflict. It's the hurt that's there that needs to be addressed. And conflict transformation really provides the vehicle through which this can be dealt with deeply. I don't have the time today to go into all the underpinnings of conflict transformation. John Paul Lederach has written about this extensively, and there's a small book for those of you who are interested, which is called The Little Book of Conflict Transformation. You can actually pick it up. There's a PDF available online if you do a search. It's a simple book, about 60 pages, but it really goes into many of the elements of conflict transformation. But just to give an example of it, I can speak, for example, about Ray Lipicon. And let's just say that Ray and I, we're speaking today. This is the 24th of June. And somehow I had in my mind that I was going to be speaking on the 25th of June. And at the very last minute, Ray gives me a call and says, we're all here. We're waiting. The audience is here. What's going on? And I say, Ray, the talk is for the 25th of June. It's not the 24th of June. And he said, and Ray says, no, it's actually for today. So I go online. And then as I go online to speak to everybody, I say, you know, I'm sorry I'm a little bit late. Ray made a huge mistake. He told me that the event was on the 25th, but it's actually on the 24th. And it's not the first time that he's done this. Oftentimes he makes these same kinds of mistakes, and I'm getting tired of it. you can imagine what the impact of that is, you know. And then later, Ray sends me a note and politely shows that actually the event was scheduled for the 24th, you know. I can apologize to Ray, but that may settle, his note settles the conflict, but that conflict has not been transformed to the original condition. The hurt's there. I insulted him for no reason. I embarrassed him for no reason. And those types of issues have to be addressed. So conflict transformation is dealing with that. It's dealing with the hurt, the harm, the resentment, the historical pain that exists behind so many of the conflicts that exist around us and that go on a day-to-day basis. The media fails when it does not exercise diligence and cover the complete story behind any given conflict. That's a very serious mistake. If we look at today's world, Dr. Jenkins mentioned it in his opening, there's a lot of concern about China. Look at China today and you recognize that China has territorial disputes and sovereignty disputes with Korea, with Japan, with Taiwan, with the Philippines, obviously with Hong Kong, and indeed with India. This is a very serious matter. And the United States presence is probably one of the key factors which has been able to somehow mitigate what would be otherwise, I think, already a situation where many of those conflicts would have been addressed not by negotiation, but by military force. Korea and Japan play a very, very key role in terms of the relationship that exists with China. Again, we heard this from Dr. Jenkins. The United States, Korea, and Japan play a very key role. Yes, today we have a very hardline government in China, but the fact that countries such as the United States, Korea, and Japan are there in place, they play an important role because there is still a constituency within China which would like to see rule of law, which would like to see democracy. And the voice, the lobbying of these three countries is very, very important. And furthermore, the military credibility which exists behind this alliance is a very crucial one to assure the stability in the region. We know that there is still historical World War II baggage, even between the United States and Japan, part of what has not been completely transformed. If you ever go to Japan and you visit the Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo, I would encourage you to visit it. You'll see a lot of it there. You'll see a lot of feelings and senses that somehow the war, even the way in which Japan was kind of handled by the United States prior to Pearl Harbor, that story you'll find at the Yasukuni Shrine. And also there's the issue of, was Hiroshima really necessary? Was Nagasaki really necessary? Those are issues which are still there. The Japanese don't necessarily say so vocally, but obviously, given the memorial that they have every year, given the great importance that they attributed to President Obama's visit there a number of years back, many Japanese feel that could have been that way of kind of accelerating the conflict could have been avoided. There could have been other ways of doing that. They could have maybe just exploded the bomb somewhere in the ocean instead of doing what was done with all the life costs. Anyway, it's a debate. My point, quite simply, is conflict transformation can only fully be addressed when those issues begin to be healed as well. So even on the domestic side, there are issues that have to be dealt with in the case of U.S.-Japan relations. Not the least of which is the treatment of Americans of Japanese descent during the war. We know that in February of 1942, 120,000 Japanese were uprooted from their homes, and they were sent off into internment camps. Many of them were located like in places like California, but were sent as far away as Arkansas to spend that time, and in very, very trying conditions, if you will. That was through the Executive Order 9066 by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So even many children, and those memories, those are part of the reality. Now, there was a Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which President Reagan signed, which provided redress and reparations for Japanese American incarceration. Every survivor or family of a survivor received $20,000 compensation from the United States, plus an apology for the United States for having done what was done to the Japanese at that time. So we can say, however, that what occurred at that time, it kind of resolved the conflict, but still this process of transforming the conflict is something that that needs to continue. And the media is meant to play a role in that, because the media, in some ways, played a certain role in the hurt that transpired at that time. February 2nd, 1942, in an editorial called "The Question of Japanese Americans," the LA Times took a rather controversial view, talking about Japanese Americans. I'll just read the latter part of this. It says, perhaps the most difficult and delicate question that confronts our powers that be is the handling, the safe and proper treatment of our American-born Japanese, our Japanese American citizens by the accident of birth, but who are Japanese nevertheless. A viper is nonetheless a viper, wherever the egg is hatched. So you could this was the press. This was the Los Angeles Times that took this incredibly biased position towards Japanese Americans. Some of them whose families had been here in the United States for 80 to 100 years already by that time. So anyway, that type of hurt is part of what has to be transformed. So that's what we mean when we talk about conflict transformation. It's dealing with those fundamental issues which are crucial to the effecting of lasting peace, as we heard from Ray. So let me stop there. That's the first part of my presentation, Ray.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ward. First of all, I feel I have to say I'm so happy I gave you the correct date and time for this webinar, so I wouldn't have to experience your wrath. But you gave a very nice definition of conflict transformation, and you also gave some nice examples too, the civil rights movement, and of course, the World War II, and we still see that today in the Japanese-American relationships on certain levels. If I may ask a question too, somewhat related to this, can you speak a little bit on the concept of position and interest?
Yes, sure.
In other words, whether it's related to one of those two that you gave, or perhaps another example, because I think that helps to define the resolving and the transforming of a conflict.
That's a very good point. Basically, there's a very famous book by William Ury, which is called Getting to Yes. And it's a key book. Everybody at the UN has read it. Diplomats around the world have read it. It's a fundamental book, and it talks about the way in which it is possible to address conflicts. And one of the things that it points out is the matter of position versus interest. People go into negotiations with positions. Iran wants to keep its right to produce nuclear energy. The United States and Israel want it to be destroyed. There are those positions. So the point is, position is one thing. The other thing is interest. It's in everybody's interest in any situation to have peace. In the case, and what's important is to try to diagnose and understand the interest of one's counterpart. Uri gives the example of two people fighting over an orange, two people saying, well, that orange is mine. No, it's mine. No, and going back and forth. And at some point, instead of doing that, they ask the question, well, what did you want that orange for? And the one says, well, I wanted the pulp of the orange because I want to make orange juice. And the other says, oh, I wanted the skin because I want to make marmalade. And suddenly they realize that because of their interest, actually, they can be able to somehow strike a deal very, very simply. If we focus only on positions and don't understand interest, then we make a very serious mistake. So our whole attitude towards that person, we can imagine if there's a dispute about who the orange belonged to, it changes when you understand that the two of you need it for two different purposes. And finally, that whatever ill feeling, it suddenly departs.
Great. So that this is just kind of a touch of what you can experience at the HJI School for Peace Studies and Leadership. So I would encourage everybody to look into that as well. I think, okay, so Dr. Ward, I think a second part of your presentation, I think we're going to look at perhaps some examples in Northeast Asia. And let me give a little bit more of a background on Dr. Ward, because again, he has very extensive background both in Europe, where he studied in Paris for many years, but as well in Asia. Dr. Ward has been a Fulbright Scholar, a Taiwan Foreign Ministry Research Fellow, a guest lecturer at the Academy of Social Science in Beijing, and Academia Sinica's Institute of Modern History in Taipei, the University of Delhi, Mumbai University, the University of Kathmandu, and Columbia University Law School in New York City. So again, would you like to continue your discussion then, Dr. Ward?
Yes, thanks you for your kind introduction, reintroduction. Really appreciated. Yeah, let me continue then with my presentation here. So I'm going to give an example here that I hope will be useful for the second part of our presentation. We recognize. I just want to say that local and local governments and the press may have damaged U.S.-Japan relations by its handling of a recent issue. So I want to focus upon that in the second part of my presentation. I apologize for the mistake with that particular slide. So anyway, the relationship as noted amongst Korea, Japan, and the United States is very crucial. But those who've studied about this part of the world know that Korea-Japan relations have not been transformed since World War II. They may have resolved some things on paper, but both sides harbor certain types of feelings towards each other. And the press can fuel or it can help to mitigate this very significant conflict. The press provides a certain leverage. We talk in conflict resolution about leverage. If the press takes a certain side, it makes a very big impact on how a conflict proceeds. So one of the big issues that I'd like to give as an example today, and it's an area where I've done quite a bit of research together with my colleague, Professor William Ley, relates to the comfort woman issue. It involves the tragedy during World War II of literally tens and tens of thousands of women who were forced into a comfort woman system during World War II. In other words, they were forced into prostitution by a decree of the Japanese Ministry of Defense. Now, I know there's a lot of debate about whether this actually happened and how the women were gathered and all those things. But I think that if you take the time to investigate this situation in detail, I think that one of the things you discover is that indeed there was a very severe injustice that so many of these women were subjected to. And no matter how much someone tries to dismiss that or put it aside, there are an overwhelming number of testimonies. In the case of Korea, there are I think about almost 300 women that came forward beginning in the 1990s and who shared the incredible things that they went through, being forced to have sex with up to 30 men a day because of this prostitution system that was put in place for Japanese soldiers, and incredible stories of rape, of torture, of brutal punishment for failure to cooperate. Many of these women couldn't have children. Many of these women lived the rest of their lives in shame because of the kind of life that they had lived during this period. Myself and Professor Ley, we wrote this book called Park Statue Politics, which deals with the issue of the comfort women themselves, the things that they went through, but also it looks at the politics of the comfort women issue, particularly as it relates to the United States. In 1991, Kim Hak-sun became the first woman. Can you imagine this? World War II ended in 1945. And it was 46 years later, really, where for the first time, Kim Hak-sun stepped forward and she said, I was a comfort woman. Then, as I said, there were scores of women that followed and likewise said the same. There were legal challenges, therefore, lawsuits, and the call for the imprisonment of the Japanese military officials. It went all the way up to President Nakasone, who had played roles in the establishment of the comfort women, Prime Minister Nakasone, in the establishment of the comfort women system. But these legal challenges, they took years, but finally it all failed. And then they took their case to the United States in 2004. But soon after, when the cases were reviewed in the United States, they were also dismissed. And when those two options did not work, they had only one thing that they could continue to rely upon, and that was trying to awaken the court of public opinion to what had happened to these women. And probably one of the most significant ways was for decades, they conducted demonstrations in Seoul, Korea, in front of the Japanese embassy, calling out for the Japanese government to recognize its responsibility for the creation of the comfort women system and its responsibility to compensate the victims of the comfort women system. Literally thousands and thousands gathered every week on Monday before that embassy. And finally, in 2011, on the occasion of the 1,000th such demonstration, they erected a statue to the comfort woman. And that changed everything. A statue that was placed right in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul. It was a deep embarrassment for Japan. They made a variety of protests because of this, but to no avail. Finally, the statue remained there. You know, finally, the statue indeed did remain there. And they've made a thing of this statue, you know, and even they dress it up in the winter so that it's warm. I mean, there's a whole treatment of this, and it's multiplied incredibly. I think there are more than 30 comfort women statues in various cities and venues across South Korea. There are comfort women statues in many different places. However, it might surprise you to know that the first monument to the comfort women was set up in 2010 in Palisades Park, New Jersey. And this caused a huge controversy immediately as well. The Japanese ambassador went to Palisades Park and spoke before the city council, deeply concerned and embarrassed by the fact that this monument had been established. But it was not going to be moving. It stayed there. As a matter of fact, there are now 5 comfort women statues in cities in New Jersey alone, you know, Union City, Teaneck, New Jersey, sorry, I don't remember, Hudson, there's in 5 different cities in New Jersey. And across the United States, there are 15 monuments which deplore the circumstances that the comfort women went through. Those monuments were set up by city councils, and they were, without exception, they received great support from the press in each of those venues. I'm going to just give one example of press support as we move along here. But the most significant, probably, of any of those monuments was the one that was established in 2014 in Glendale, California. And it really invited the question, should the comfort woman narrative in Korea be the same in the United States? In other words, what might appear on an inscription of one of these statues in Korea, should we have the same kind of inscription on a statue like that in the United States, given that this is the United States? Those statues were set up with the approval of city councils in the United States, and they were set up often with support of the of local press and sometimes even by national press. Did the press fulfill its responsibility in investigating and informing the American people about the issues that needed to be taken into account in any American expression of support for the victims of the comfort women system vis-a-vis Japan? I would say no. And the sample case I'd like to give is the wording on the Glendale, California Comfort Women Statue Monument. The tone of it. This is Central Park in Glendale, California. And there's this monument to the comfort women there in that park. There's an inscription there. And if you look at the very top line of that inscription, which is in a larger font than the rest of the inscription, it reads, "I was a sex slave of Japanese military." So that's the first thing that you see when you walk through that park if you start to read that inscription. And it's bigger, as I said, than the rest of that inscription. It's abrasive. It's not only abrasive, but it reflects a very strange standard. In the United States, we know that we had slavery. How do we memorialize slavery in the United States? Well, we can set up a monument to Sojourner Truth, and there are many monuments to Sojourner Truth across the United States. We can set up a monument to Harriet Tubman and for her the important role that she played in the Underground Railroad. We can set up a monument, and there are many monuments to Frederick Douglass for the way in which he was so outspoken and so eloquent in his denunciation of slavery in America. However, in the United States, there's no widely known statue that simply states white people did this. There's no statue in the United States that says I was a slave of white people. And yet we allowed this to appear. A city council, Glendale City Council, suburb of Los Angeles, allowed this to appear. And the press supported it. When the City Council of Glendale and the Los Angeles Times, I'll show an article a little bit later, supported this, they dismissed past history. The way in which the Japanese were mistreated in America during the period surrounding World War II. We have to consider, if we're talking about the press in the United States, the actors who were involved in this conflict and the victims of this conflict. Glendale, California has 1,400 to 1,700 Japanese Americans living in it. They walk through that park. They are fifth-generation Americans. Gosei, they're referred to, many of them. You know, if I look at my family background, my family background, it's only on my family's side, it only goes back 4 generations. These people have been around longer than my family's been around in the United States, you know. And yet they have to deal with this denunciation of Japan and their Japanese Americans. Phyllis Kim, she's responsible for the Comfort Women Action for Redress and Education for defending the cause of the Comfort Women in Korea. She's not 5th-generation American. She's 1st-generation American. You know, and I'm not saying I totally believe in her sympathy. I totally believe in her cause, but I don't think that cause can be brought forward in Korea, in the United States, in the same way that it was brought forward in the United States. We have to look at the history of the venue. Glendale Central Park, where you can see that the Comfort Woman statue is located. Glendale Central Park is 6 miles from Tuna Canyon Detention Center. 6 miles from the place where thousands of Japanese were processed as they were placed in these internment camps, you know. 120,000 prisoners that were placed in those camps. And there were 1,862 deaths in the camps during that time. That's probably a pretty normal mortality rate. There were probably some cases, but that were not normal, but there were even a few cases, very few, of people actually being killed in the camps. But things they were in these camps during this period of time, and as I said, there are 15 monuments denouncing Japan's World War activities in the United States, supported by American municipalities, a largely sympathetic press, and they were introduced to these cities by Korean civil society actors who are not fifth-generation Americans, but first-generation Americans. They told the Korean story, which was the only story that they knew. Somehow it was a failure on the part of the press, and it was a failure on the part of these municipalities not to integrate the American dimension of the story into what appeared on those monuments. And I'll get into that a bit more. Furthermore, think about it for a second. Neither Japanese citizens nor Americans of Japanese descent have ever lobbied nationwide to set up detention center monuments for the victims of World War II internment, or to set up Hiroshima monuments in cities in the United States. They have not done it, but somehow Japan was singled out, and people of Japanese American descent were singled out because of the propagation of these monuments across the United States. There's a monument to Japanese Americans that's located in Washington, D.C., but that monument is not a denunciation of the United States. It is a monument to Japanese Americans' love for America and patriotism. Consider this what appears in that monument in D.C. I am proud that I am an American of Japanese ancestry. I believe in this nation's institutions, ideals, and traditions. I glory in her heritage. I boast of her history. I trust in her future. In spite of being interned in prison camps, little by little, Japanese Americans won the trust of the United States, and they were able to serve in the U.S. military. They were among the most decorated in World War II. Indeed, 20 Japanese Americans won the Medal of Honor. And yet, these cities and the press didn't take that into account at all. Furthermore, most seriously, they did not take into account something else, which was very, very serious, and that was American complicity in the comfort women's system. This is a picture of Japanese soldiers lining up in order to go into one of these comfort women's stations. In his book, Japan's Comfort Women by Yuki Tanaka, he makes the point that between August of 1945 and March of 1946, American soldiers used those same comfort women's stations during that period of time. In March of 1946, they were finally abolished by General Douglas MacArthur. Doesn't that deserve to be mentioned on those monuments if we're going to be creating monuments? Should the comfort woman narrative in Korea be the same as in the United States? Should it indict Japan and accept no responsibility for things that Americans have done? What is the role of the U.S. media in transforming this conflict? Is it responsible to promote a different narrative in the United States? What deserved consideration in the creation of monuments in the United States? It should have taken into account the U.S. role in patronizing the comfort women's system. That should have been taken into account when can we just blame the Japanese, or do we have to recognize that we somehow participated in this? It should have taken into account the history of Americans of Japanese descent who were unfairly punished and held in detention camps during this same period. It could have taken into account Japanese Americans' forgiving patriotic attitudes during and following the World War II, feeling we don't want to offend these people. We have to be careful how we do what we do. And finally, it should have taken into account the importance of U.S.-Japan-Korea relations for regional and global security. One of the consequences of the Glendale controversy is that Higashi Osaka, a Japanese city, threatened to withdraw its sister city relationship with Glendale. And in the case of San Francisco, Osaka did withdraw its sister city relationship with San Francisco because of the fact that the Japanese had been so unfairly so unfairly treated by an American ally, not taking into account at all the larger issues that had to be looked at in a case like this. I'm sorry, I meant to have included in here, but it looks like it did not have included. At the time of the establishment of the monument in Glendale in 2013, the Los Angeles Times, the same one that referred to Japanese Americans as vipers, in 2013 once again stumbled over itself, and it put together a paper, a front story paper, totally supporting the establishment of the Comfort Woman Station with a Comfort Woman monument in Glendale, California, with I was a slave of the Japanese military. In France, one of my favorite spots is the Place de la République in Strasbourg. And there's a monument that's called For Our Dead. And that particular monument is a mother who is holding two of her deceased sons. Strasbourg is an interesting place because people there are ethnically German, but their citizenship is French. One of the sons is said to have symbolizes the one who fought for France. The other fought for Germany. If you look at this statue closely, you'll see that the two brothers, somehow they are grasping hands. Somehow there was a reconciliation after World War II between France and Germany. They both realized that they had guilt and responsibility for what happened. America, Japan, Korea, they all have some responsibility for what happened to the Comfort Women. They all have some responsibility for the ways in which we mistreated, abused, and took advantage of the citizens of our respective countries during that war. War is always brutal. That doesn't justify it, but that had to be factored in, I believe. And the press needed to tell that story so that that could somehow be avoided. So anyway, that's basically what I wanted to share concerning conflict transformation and the role that the press can play in addressing conflict transformation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dr. Ward. Yeah, that was definitely I would say an unbiased perspective. You gave all accounts, and you used the phrase "court of public opinion," which the media is, and I have to say, as well as your book, Park Statue Politics, was a good contribution to a better understanding of this situation as well. I think one question, if we have time later, that comes into my mind is how can trust be rebuilt after all this? So we could talk about transformation and healing, but how does that trust last? So we can see that through your presentation how media plays such a pivotal role in conflict transformation. It could be a catalyst for peace and healing, or it can escalate tensions depending on the perspective of the author as well. So we want to look a little bit more now at the media side, and we have with us Cheryl Wetstein today, who has over 40 years experience in both New York City and Washington, D.C. in the media. So I'd like to welcome Cheryl. She has, that was prior to her retirement in 2018. She spent 33 years at the Washington Times, mostly as a national reporter covering federal and state family policy issues. And she currently advises the International Media Association for Peace, and she's also the senior advisor for the Times Media Global Group. And she edits books, websites, and she and her husband, Douglas, live in Maryland. They have 3 adult children and 2 grandchildren. So welcome, Cheryl.
Thank you very much. Well, the question is posed about what can the media do to resolve the Comfort Women and the detention of Japanese. And part of the story is indeed that the media would cover all sides. And I would say that Dr. Ward missed one more conflict area, which is men and women. Why were women used this way? So there's deep heart everywhere that needs to be soothed and reconciled. And the media can help this. Now I'm going to go broad. media, the deeper question is, how can the media be part of the solution versus driving the problems endlessly? I have 3 points to make. One is that media and audiences are primed and expect to see and devour conflict all the time. Media is filled with sensationalism, salacious information, scandal. A real New York Post headline was "Headless Body Found in Topless Bar." Now, you know, everybody wanted to read that story. And this kind of appetite for sensationalism and drama and conflict, and especially blood, you know, if it bleeds, it leads. This is the way it is, even if peace is literally breaking out in neighborhoods and homes and residences and communities all around the conflict. The media cannot seem to grab peace and hold on to it for very long because it gets shoved off the front page, shoved to the back. I experienced this privately. I covered welfare reform, which was a huge policy change in America, a huge change for people who live in poverty. Well, I was still following up on it years later, and the incremental things that were happening, women going to work, people's incomes rising, et cetera, et cetera. But one of my bosses eventually told me, "Cheryl, enough with the happy news about welfare reform. We need you covering stuff that's more breaking news." So following the impact of this massive policy change was more difficult than you'd realize. So step number one is to realize that we have an addiction to conflict, and we have to start there to understand that we need to break that addiction. Number two is the business model for media has been impacted, especially print. Magazines and newspapers are still on the ropes. But the advertising, no advertising, the streaming services, I mean, our media is in constant flux, and it's all about making money. These are businesses. We don't have government-run media. So everybody has to figure out how to make their money and pay their staff so that you can get professional journalism. And I'll just mention that the internet literally blew up our model. When the internet started, I was so happy. It's like, finally, I get my own little library right online, except it destroyed classified advertising for newspapers, which was the main moneymaker, the bread and butter. So we have been coping with that all these years later. And because of the need to make money, then sensationalism got even more accelerated, because if you want clickbait, you got to put something up there that people will have to see. And there aren't subscriptions yet for peace news. So we have to kind of figure out a business model that where people actually expect to find wholesome or problem-solving news, good things in the news, and that's why they subscribe to it. So breaking the habit of longing for gory stuff and sensational stuff, and then finding a place that where you expect to see problem solving. It's fine to know about the problem. In fact, we need to know about the problem from all vantage points. But how can we therefore then find a place that will help with solutions? Because there's always 15 great solutions waiting to be put in the media. And my third point is about goes to the last point about expecting the media to become a reliable source for peacemaking. Now, this is lofty. I promise you, this is not the norm. There is something called peace journalism, but it really is more, we got to win the revolution kind of stuff. But to have the media, which is cratered in its credibility right now. So as it rebuilds, if it could be known as a reliable source for conflict resolution, for peace, for practical problem solving, that would change it. there'll be some resistance. I picked up something from a University of Baltimore article about peace journalism, and it mentions how journalists definitely do not currently see themselves as mediators or peacemakers, because they say creating peace is not our job. That's not our role. But then the same author makes the point that good journalism contributes to conflict resolution, because now you're finally understanding the whole story and you can begin to craft solutions. At the end here, 2 more points. The Universal Peace Federation is the creator of IMAP, the International Association for Media Peace. And UPF was founded by the Reverend Sun Myung Moon and his wife, Dr. Hak Ja Han. They talked to media. They made newspapers. They themselves had horrific media, by the way, but they wanted to raise the bar and really call for honorable, responsible, and ethical media. And this is an excerpt from one of Reverend Moon's talks when he met with journalists at the World Media Association events. Talking to journalists, he says, journalists are specialists in your field, but before that, you are all God's children. You are all champions of peace, specially called by God to help bring a new ethical standard into the world. And in this time when the entire world and all of humanity is advancing toward the ultimate true world of peace, the media must understand that it is called by God to an important mission in helping to realize this world of peace. That's pretty inspiring and lofty content. So building on that, when IMAP was founded about 5 years ago, we created a resolution for the thousands and thousands of journalists from around the world who joined IMAP. And this resolution says that recognizing that humanity seeks to live in a peaceful world where universally shared values lead to mutual cooperation, and acknowledge the power of the media to defend freedom, to oppose tyranny, and to preserve God-given human rights and dignity. IMAP stands for self-governing, morally responsible media that also is accurate, uses clear sources, is fair, especially because you include the opposite viewpoints, removes personal bias from news articles. And here's the last 2 points. Avoiding content that is degrading, what a change that would be, and practicing respect for the dignity of our audiences. There is hope for the media to turn around. I don't know which generation is going to take the bull by the horns, but I'll tell you, it's time to take the swords and turn them into plowshares. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe, for your comments. Yeah, you couple of the problems you mentioned, the breaking the addiction to the conflict kind of journalism that people want, that sensationalism, and the media's need to make money. So that's they're really facing that today. But I'm grateful to be working with you at IMAP to create that model. And I think, as Dr. Moon said, I think the key is creating ethical journalism. So, how do we do that? We're trying to do it through IMAP, through these webinars that we're doing, through the conferences that IMAP holds internationally. And I think we're making progress, and I think we'll continue to do so, making and finding allies who do promote ethical journalism. So I'm sorry, we are kind of running out of time at this time. If I can ask Dr. Ward to come back on the screen, and so much thank you, Dr. Ward, for joining us and your presentations. And if you can just give a concluding comment for us.
Well, I'm so glad that I could share this forum with Cheryl. She's certainly been a person who has, I think, has done so much to really try to shift American culture and kind of to remind us of the things that need to be appreciated, that have been forgotten and have been dismissed and have have caused irrevocable damage in our country. So, yeah, thank you, Cheryl, for really carrying the banner for so many decades. I mean, we all owe a debt of gratitude to you for your amazing service and efforts that you've made over all this time. I totally agree about the issue of the treatment of men by women. One of the most tragic dimensions, if you ask me, of the comfort women controversy is the defense that what are the Japanese denialists, people who say, "Oh, none of this ever happened." Their way of handling this is to say, they were well paid, everything was on board, everything was fine, but and you really will say, well, why does that make it right? Why would that make it right? Why are you defending it based upon that, you know? So yeah, anyway, thank you for pointing that out, Cheryl. I appreciate that. And to close, Ray, how do we move forward with this, particularly in the case of Japan, America, US relations? I think the America has to take the lead. The book that Professor Lea and I wrote, what it really talks about is, look, okay, Japan, you're saying it didn't happen. We're saying it did happen. We're saying we have some guilt in allowing this system to be set up. We're kind of really ready to go to the front, but we hope you can come forward too, and we hope also Koreans can recognize the role that they played in this, because they played a severe role in terms of gathering these women and misrepresenting what was going to happen to them. You know, so there is a way to bring this all together, and I think America should be the one who's in the lead in this. And so that's why I think we have to rethink all these things that have happened the last few years, where politicians, in order to just get ahead, have not really dealt with the reality of history, the reality of what this country has done in the past towards Japanese Americans, towards Asians in general. And this could be a chance to start anew. This could be a chance, I think, hopefully, to begin the process of healing. And the U.S. plays a very important role in that by taking responsibility rather than pointing the finger at Japan.
Yes, responsibility. I like that word. Thank you, Dr. Ward. Cheryl, any final thoughts?
Yes, that editors, publishers, broadcasters, making room for conflict resolution and building a following. It starts small, but if you have columnists, you have commentators, you have special in the news mix, this is conflict resolution time, then the programs and the issues that people like Dr. Ward can bring up and hold events around. Now you have, it's like you're setting up the information that the journalists can use to do their own reporting and build it. But the point is you build the expectation that there are solutions that the media is going to bring to me. And it's thanks to the work that Dr. Ward and others who are interested in conflict resolution, you bring it to the forefront. And you're not just another event that is one of 20 on a day, but you become to the number one. We have to have a peace story today, a conflict resolution story. I would say that peace is not fragile. It may take some careful steps to get there, but when you have peace and you fortify it every single day, it becomes very strong. And frankly, peace is freedom. That's what we want. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you to both of you, and thank you to our viewers who joined us today. And just so you know, our website, us.upf.org, has all the recordings of all of our, not just IMAP, but all the associations of UPF on our site there. So you can always watch this later as well. And I'd just like to read something in summary. I think it sums up our program today. Media is a powerful actor in conflict transformation. When guided by principles of accuracy, fairness, and peace, it can help shift societies from violence to dialogue, from division to unity. However, when misused, it can deepen divides. Media practitioners, therefore, carry both a great responsibility and opportunity in shaping a peaceful future. So I hope you enjoyed this program today, and I hope it is, again, a little bit of a contribution to lasting peace. So thank you so much.